Hey everybody, it's Abishur Prakash, aka Mr. Geopolitics. As October 2025 begins, everybody's wondering what's next for geopolitics. There is so much taking place today. There's so much unpredictability, so much uncertainty, so much unfamiliarity that it's hard to stay on top of what's taking place, let alone follow a specific flashpoint or fight. However, there are 5 big ticket items from the US-China fight to the future of AI and chips that every global leader should be thinking about. These are shifts, emerging changes that will define the future of the global economy, the state of regions, and the geopolitical landscape for months and years to come. Let's jump right in. The first big ticket item has to do with the United States and China. These two nations are locked in a very strange dance where at one moment they're embracing each other and at another moment they're enraging each other. For example, Chinese purchases of American soybeans are down to their 20-year low as Brazil supplies 95% of China's soybean needs. At the same time, however, China is dangling $1 trillion in pledges in the US economy if America meets certain conditions, many of which expand beyond the economic arena, i.e. Taiwan. So the US and China in October could sign a deal, or they could return to their positions in April where they were swinging at each other. There is a 50-50 chance of the United States and China signing a deal, or at the very minimum, creating a framework for a deal as they created for TikTok. However, if the United States and China cannot ink a deal this month, if there is no progress on trade talks, if US and Chinese negotiating teams continue to face resistance, even stalling from either side, and then the runway will disappear. The US and China will increasingly view each other, as they did in April, as their biggest adversaries in the short term and in the long term. At the end of this month is the APEC summit in Asia. If the United States and China can get some kind of framework for a deal on the table, then there could be a meeting between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. However, if at the APEC summit the United States and China are already at odds, then all hopes of a summit will be dashed. The second big ticket item has to do with AI and tech. There are growing concerns that there's an AI bubble forming in the United States as investors pour money and companies package themselves as AI firms, except they don't create much value. However, expand the scope beyond the United States. Look at Europe, look at the Middle East, look at China, and there is no AI bubble forming on the same scale. Rather, these countries, these markets, these governments are being driven by a hunger for sovereignty and self-reliance. And already, countries like China have unveiled all kinds of mandates to govern what kind of chips to use or not to use. This could expand in October as the Chinese government, as the EU, unveil new initiatives to drive their locally created technologies, their locally created sovereignty on the back of chips, on the back of AI, and in the process, reduce reliance on America. This means what takes place in October will put America in a very strange situation where it has to defend its technology footprint from nations that want technology to be supplied from within their national borders. The third big ticket item has to do with the war in Gaza. There is a peace framework on the table that's being accepted almost by Israel, Hamas, the United States. If this deal succeeds, it could bring stability back to the region. However, if this framework, if this ceasefire, if this deal falls through the cracks, then chaos could return. However, unlike in the past, when the war was raging after October 7th, unlike then when Arab capitals kept quiet, perhaps pursuing the need for rapprochement between Israel and the Arab world, unlike then, Arab nations may not stay quiet considering the stakes today. All of this was seen after Israel struck Doha. After this took place, the Gulf Cooperation Council had an emergency meeting, and for the first time in a long time, they activated their collective defense mechanism, and they said that the attack on Qatar was equal to an attack on the entire Arab world. This is where Arab capitals are at vis-a-vis their relationship with Israel. If this deal falls through, then countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like the UAE, may refuse to bite their tongue anymore and could make changes that fundamentally change how the region operates from the ground up. And connected to a war in the Middle East is the growing possibility of a war in South America, specifically between the US and Venezuela. As America moves military assets into the region, it echoes the same maneuvers before the US struck 3 nuclear sites in Iran. If America strikes Venezuela, however, it has to deal with the biggest shockwave, which is striking Venezuela could draw America into collision with South America. And this could happen because striking Venezuela could sideline the economic growth, the foreign investment, the development, the overall attractiveness of the region in the eyes of the global economy. And this could anger many nations that need new investment, new capital, new deals with other states to drive their national agendas. If all of this is sidelined, then these nations could view America through a very different lens, very reminiscent of the Cold War. The fourth big ticket item has to do with security in Europe. There are now growing calls in the US, in Europe, for Russian fighter jets to be shot down if they violate NATO airspace. This is an unbelievable moment. This is the kind of situation that was part of wargaming, part of simulations, or even outlandish scenarios of a future war between NATO and Russia. Now, however, this is exactly what is on the table. The idea of shooting down Russian fighter jets that violate NATO airspace is something that's currently being entertained and currently being debated. Now, if this were to happen, it changes the state of play for Russia, for NATO, for Europe, and the world. It opens the door to a new war unlike anything the world has seen. But short of that, even the threat of shooting down Russian fighter jets signals where European security and the war in Ukraine may be heading. There are 3 big signals to think about. The first is that the West may be about to arm Ukraine in far more significant ways and approve far more lethal strikes, including those that target Russia's energy sector. Already, 40% of Russia's refining capacity has been turned offline, meaning Russia is now importing gas from Belarus, from China, from South Korea to offset its economic engine starting to slow. Energy. Now, Ukraine could be on the precipice of launching more destabilizing strikes on Russia. Second is that there is now a new correlation between drones and the escalation of war. Drone strikes were once viewed as cyber attacks, inconsequential, not going to change the status quo. But today, the Ukrainian drone strikes on Russia or the Russian drone strikes on Ukraine that are now violating NATO airspace are the single biggest reason for the escalation in the Ukraine war. This is a new reality for drones and for warfare, and the way in which the West, specifically Europe, retaliates against the next Russian drone incursions could be far more serious, far more significant than anything seen in the past. Last is that the rhetoric coming from the US, coming from Europe, coming from Russia, from shooting down Russian fighter jets to the Russians doing their nuclear saber rattling, is taking this war to new heights. It's opening the door to a dangerous situation, not just in terms of NATO and Russia colliding, but both sides threatening action that the entire global economy has to adapt and plan for. The last big ticket item has to do with the shutdown in the US. This is a shutdown that is far different from other instances in the past, like in 2018 and 2019. This may be the beginning of shutdowns becoming a far more frequent cyclical event that sidelines American society. This latest shutdown comes as US society is already deeply polarized, deeply divided, especially after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Emotions are running high, divisions are expanding at record speed. However, this shutdown is not just about the state of American society or the state of the US government. It's also about America's standing in the eyes of the world. In October, America will have to decide whether the shutdown is worth losing credibility in the eyes of the globe or whether it's better to open the government up and rebuild its clout on the world stage. The longer the shutdown continues and the longer this snowballs, including permanent layoffs, including more political division and collision between Democrats and Republicans, the more this happens, the rest of the world will increasingly view America less as reliable, less as predictable, and more as the opposite. First it was tariffs, then it was trade, now it is the shutdown. The runway is limited for the world to remain patient, for the world to keep viewing America a certain way. So that is my October 2025 geopolitical outlook, touching on big ticket items like US China, like AI, like the situation in the Middle East. As I said at the beginning of this video, there is far more taking place, but these are the 5 main headaches, the 5 main challenges that are occupying the minds of global leaders. Of course, the situation in all of these areas is very fluid. What the situation is on Monday could be different to Tuesday, could be different to Wednesday. But as of right now, this is the state of play, and these are the signals that these battlegrounds are giving off. If you're interested in the big geopolitical disruptions and shocks that could strike the global economy in Q4, check out the link in the description. If you resonated with this video, don't forget to drop a like and hit subscribe. Enjoy the rest of the month. Talk soon.